I'm going to put this disclaimer up because I'm going to briefly talk about some of the research studies that are involving neurological conditions that are actively being studied. And so by no way is this intended to be medical advice. These are just the studies that are being done or actively being done, most of which are in animals, and some are moving into human trials. Alzheimer's. There was actually once a group that was trying to take MCT and make it a drug. It's crazy. So they were looking at something known as AC1202, and they basically looked at BHB levels, and they were able to increase them to about 0.4, which we know isn't that high. But even at that small of a bump, this medium chain triglyceride, this proprietary medium chain triglyceride, was able to see significant increases in what's known as the ADAS cognitive test in Alzheimer's disease patients. So again, they were able to see improvements in cognitive function even with a small bump in ketone levels from MCTs. Now imagine what would happen if you gave a higher amount. We know what happens when we're on a ketogenic diet. Imagine what happens when you give exogenous ketones, which we know would bump someone up a lot higher. The problem with MCTs is the dosage needed to bump up that high likely caused GI issues. And in this study, they found that nearly 50% of people had gut issues. Here's a study in animals, looking at a ketone ester diet. And they basically found that the animals that were consuming the ketone ester spent significantly more time traveling around. It improved spatial and working memory in these animals, and it reduced the accumulation of amyloid tau, which we know is one of the main markers of buildup in Alzheimer's. So again, very interesting study and potential promise in these areas. Here's some studies looking at the possible how is this happening? Well, mechanistically, ketones may actually be blocking amyloid entry and improve cognition in Alzheimer's models. That's what this recent study in 2016 showed, and it may actually be improving and bypassing some of the glucose metabolism or dysfunction that occurs in instances of Alzheimer's. So those are there for you to read more and look into. Here's a brand new study published in 2020 looking at BHB impeding the progress or the progression of Alzheimer's disease in ApoE deficient mice. Again, new studies are coming out daily, and hopefully we continue to build this into human trials. Parkinson's disease. Dr. Richard Veach was very focused on this area, and he found that the D form of BHB protected neurons in models of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. So basically they gave this again to animals, and the BHB doubled the survival rate and increased neuron size and protected against neurotoxicity in animals with Parkinson's. Again, interesting stuff, promise. We have unpublished data out of our laboratory that I will show you preliminary results, but these are not published yet. We gave 10 grams of DBHB in an individual who had Parkinson's for over 20 years and looked at object tracking efficiency. We have a bunch of different markers we can look at in our laboratory and saw that object tracking improved and the amount of targets they hit improved just with one serving of 10 grams of RBHB. Quickly, I'll touch on traumatic brain injury, where I think there's an enormous application and potential. We know that following a traumatic brain injury, there is a period in which your brain is becoming resistant to glucose and cannot utilize glucose very effectively, and that can occur from 24 hours all the way up to several months, depending upon the severity of the injury. In normal brains, brain glucose metabolism is functioning fine. In mild head injury or severe head injury, there's impairments. How do we overcome that? Well, here's a great resource, and I'm gonna provide all of these for you guys to research on your own, because that's the whole point of this video, is to get you all of the resources that I've dove into, things that we've written about in the Ketogenic Bible, and brand new resources that we're talking about in a new course that we have coming out. Clinical review, ketones and brain injury. Great review paper from 2011. Granted, there's been a lot of studies published since then, but this is a good core addressing a lot of the things with brain injury and the potential application for ketones. Now the big question is, can ketones help? Here's a study done by Prins and colleagues, and they looked at the brains of animals with traumatic brain injury. They had 20% less ATP production compared to just a control condition. These animals were producing 20% less ATP compared to a control. When you gave BHB, when you gave exogenous ketones, that was completely negated, completely mitigated. They didn't have the same decrease in ATP production despite having the traumatic brain injury, right? So interesting stuff to look at. Again, disclaimer, always consult your medical physician, and always make sure you're checking and referring to the research that's out there that's published. Ketones may extend lifespan. There's something known as the programmed lifespan theory, which in essence basically says that as we get older, genes start to turn off. And that's the main premise of the programmed lifespan theory. Well, one of the things that we know in C. elegans, which was one of the early models, is that D, not the L form, only the D form of beta-hydroxybutyrate extends lifespan in this model. And this has been shown by Claire Edwards and her group multiple times, that it might actually be anti-aging. How is that possible? Well, we know that BHB, particularly the D form of BHB, acts as a histone deacetylase inhibitor. And what that means, or that's short for HDAC, HDACs act like a boa constrictor around our DNA. They wind themselves around our DNA to prevent expression of the DNA. Ketones kind of act like a bodyguard at our DNA and prevent that boa constrictor from wrapping itself around and squeezing the DNA and preventing expression. That is an oversimplified way of showing how ketones are HDAC inhibitors. Again, this was a study out of Auburn University looking at ketones having potential anti-aging benefits. And this is looking at days before 50% of death rate. We literally took animals, either put them on a low-fat diet, a ketogenic diet, or a low-fat plus just exogenous ketones. And what we found, and we carried this out for their entire life, how long did they live? Well, the low-fat condition died the earliest. Low-fat plus exogenous ketones lived longer. So ketones may have an anti-aging benefit, and then the ketogenic diet was even slightly longer than that. So again, the ketones themselves seem to have an anti-aging benefit. We know that ketones are signaling molecules. Our colleague, Dr. John Newman, is really studying this area with Eric Verdin. Ketone bodies as signaling metabolites. It's much more than a metabolite. We're seeing a lot of these areas being known that ketones aren't just an ingredient. They're not just a supplement. They are actually having signaling effects, and something that I can probably spend an entire video talking about. But again, the point of this is to bring to light what ketones are and what ketones are not. So the question is, now that I've talked about all of those potential applications for exogenous ketones, are ketones all sunshine and rainbows, right? Well, here's a couple things that you need to be cautious of. The big question is ketones, will they cause an insulin spike, and do exogenous ketones suppress my endogenous ketone production if I'm on a ketogenic diet? And the answer is, it depends. So here's a theory. You have increased ketones, if I'm on a ketogenic diet particularly. I increase my ketones with supplemental ketones. I stimulate insulin. That's going to lower glucose. It's going to lower free fatty acids. It's going to prevent my body from making its own ketones, right? That's the theory. The studies show that that may be the case, but it's dose dependent. And what I mean by that is there's one study where they basically gave BHB, they infused it every 3 hours and found that free fatty acids were not correlated with ketone levels. So ketones, even infusing them, didn't suppress free fatty acid levels. However, there's another study that when you get to like the 3, but mainly between 5 to 10 millimolar range, which likely with exogenous ketones likely would not happen unless you're doing the ester. That very rarely would happen with a ketone salt. You do get an insulin release, and that was in these animals, and you see this huge rise in insulin between the 5 and 10 millimolar level. And so a lot of it depends on the dose. It's not as clear as I take exogenous ketones, it's going to increase insulin. Not necessarily. What we say is anything over 5 millimoles at this point has been shown to do that. Anything under has not. And in fact, this was a study done in 2010 where they demonstrated that both blood glucose and blood insulin decreased by 50% in rats that were fed a diet where 30% of their calories came from a ketone ester. And this suggests that ketone supplementation basically increases insulin sensitivity. So again, it depends on the dose. It depends on how much it's rising in the blood. What we're saying is anything over 3.5 to 5 millimoles, you likely will get that insulin response. Just something to be cognizant of. Likely won't happen with ketone salts, potentially with ketone esters. Here's the big one, and I know there's some companies in particular that I'll discuss that market this, and they use fake celebrities and fake pictures to endorse their product, which is crazy, is that ketones will not instantly melt fat off of your body if you eat like crap and are completely sedentary. It will not happen. They are not intended to completely replace a ketogenic diet, but rather support a healthy lifestyle. It's important to understand that ketones do have calories. It's estimated that they're between 4.7 and 5.4 calories per gram. So a little bit more than a carbohydrate, but much less than a fat. So again, if you are eating Big Macs and drinking sodas and drinking ketones with your Big Mac, likely not going to have any effect whatsoever. You can make the argument that it's going to improve insulin sensitivity, and it might. Now, even if you're not eating a ketogenic diet, most of the studies that have been done with exogenous ketones have shown improvements, and that's okay. I think it should be supplemental and looked at as a tool, not a complete replacement for living a healthier lifestyle and at least being more carb conscious, ideally getting closer towards a low carbohydrate, higher fat ketogenic approach. Ketones are not a miracle cure, nor are they a drug. I think that's very important to touch on. You see this meme going up all over the place with coconut oil, right? Coconut oil fixes everything. Rub it on your hair, rub it on your skin, rub it on your relationship, rub it in your bank account. Like, whatever it is, like, ketones are not this miracle. They have a ton of applications that I spoke on and data supporting them, but it's important to keep them in context. One of the last things I want to touch on is ketones are not effective unless given in effective dosages and forms. And here's studies to support that. So this study was done in 2018 showing exogenous ketones had no effect on cognitive responses after high-intensity interval training. They gave 11 grams of DL-BHB, the mixed isomer, and found no effect. Another study was looking at the ketone diester impaired performance in cyclists. Why? Well, in the first study, 11 grams of DL-BHB, it's not the active form. It's not the D form of BHB. You likely need a higher amount to get that effect. Excuse me. You likely need a higher amount to get that effect, whereas 11 grams might be the equivalent to like 5 or 4 grams of the actual effective amount due to some competitive inhibition. Now, the second study with the ketone ester, the reason why they don't think they saw any performance improvements was because they said the gut disturbances were likely the cause of the performance impairment. Like I said, the ketone ester, especially in 2017, they're starting to make improvements towards it now, but in 2017, did not taste good. It definitely did not taste good. And so imagine drinking that and doing a performance trial, you're likely not going to perform well. Here's another study from 2017 looking at oral BHB. Again, ketone salts failed to improve 4-minute cycling performance. Again, they gave 11.7 grams of the mixed isomer, the DL-BHB, and found no differences. Again, they're using the wrong form. Last but not least, ketones, again, are not effective unless given in effective dosages and forms. And unfortunately, you guys, if you've been on my channel, if you look, I'll link the video so you can see this. I've gone hard against these ketone scams because, as you can see, I'm passionate and think that exogenous ketones have a great deal of potential. But what happens is when individuals or companies take that and run with it completely in the wrong direction, it ruins the conversation for anyone. So you've been seeing, which is what I was alluding to earlier, these companies, I think it might be one company or multiple companies, marketing these keto pills, and it's an absolute scam. The video that I did has gotten shared by a lot. of people. And then I did a second one as a follow-up because I got so much feedback on the first one. So I will link those two videos. But if it comes in a pill, it is, one, not the effective dosage at all, and two, it's certainly not the effective form. So let me give context around that. I've seen some of these bottles. Most of them have 800 milligrams of DL-BHB per 2 caps. So each cap only has 400 milligrams of DL-BHB. So our lab has shown that you need at minimum 3 grams of the actual effective form, the RBHB, to really trigger a result or trigger a bump. You would likely then need to consume 16 capsules at minimum, which is ridiculous, just to reach that 3 gram amount. That's insane, right? Absolutely insane. And so it's annoying, it's frustrating. This irritates me because I do think there's a lot of potential for exogenous ketones if they're educated on. So the reason why I'm doing this video is because I haven't come on and talked about exogenous ketones before. I've talked about them on lives. I've given many lectures on them, but there are applications if kept in context. This is ridiculous of no milligrams of BHB are not going to do anything, and then on top of that they're charging a ridiculous price for a capsule that is likely coming straight out of who knows where, and a lot of people are getting scammed out of this, and it saddens me. It's the reason why we created that video. Why is this the case? Well, we know based on studies that ketones are taken up in the brain in direction to their availability in blood. If I'm giving milligrams of not only ketones, but the wrong form, the DL, the mixed isomer, I'm never going to get taken up in utilization in the brain or any other function for that matter. It's just likely going to get excreted out, and it's a big waste. So that's important to keep in mind. One of the things we know is that ketone salts are safe in context. So there's a study by Dr. Dom D'Agostino's group looking at exogenous ketone supplementation safety. Study by Dr. Malia Holland looking at blood and cardiovascular health parameters after supplementing with ketone salts for 6 weeks. And I'll say this again with a disclaimer, there are studies that are published back from the early 2000s actually even giving them to children. This study was done giving up to 32 grams per day in smaller amounts, 4 grams 8 times per day of the DL-BHB, and they were given to 2 6-month-old infants with persistent hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia for 5 and 7 months while on tube feedings, and they found no negative effects of that. Now, I'm not recommending that whatsoever, but again, there's an ongoing study by Dr. Malia Holland actually looking at ketone salts in kids, teenagers particularly. And the thing is just to keep in mind is similar to anything, you would absolutely need to titrate the dose. What's given to adults certainly shouldn't be given to kids. But again, before we make recommendations, we need to wait on that research from Dr. Holland to ensure safety. There's studies that are published on the safety of the ketone ester as well, which literally have looked from the equivalent of 9.5 to 48 grams for like a 150-pound person. So again, promising safety. So I know that was a lot. I tried not to make this a very long video because I wanted to provide a summary. And the reason why I want to provide a summary is, again, I'm getting a lot of questions about this and wanted to address a summary of exogenous ketones. So let's sum this up. Exogenous ketones are a superfuel with a wide variety of potential applications. We now know the difference between ketone salts and ketone esters. Our bodies naturally make the D or R form. LBHB likely gets converted over. Likely not beneficial to use the mixed isomer. 1, ketones are a more efficient fuel source than glucose if you're looking at ATP produced per unit of oxygen. Exogenous ketones may enhance satiety. Ketones may make you less efficient at storing calories. Ketones may increase brown fat. Ketones increase mitochondria and increase mitochondrial function. Ketones may make us more insulin sensitive. Ketones may improve cardiac efficiency. Ketones may improve performance. Ketones may have anabolic and anti-catabolic effects. Ketones may increase blood flow. Ketones may stimulate BDNF. Ketones may serve as a great fuel for the aging brain. Ketones may have therapeutic potential in neurocognitive disorders. Ketones are signaling molecules, and ketones have anti-aging properties, right? Some of the caveats: ketones may cause an insulin spike and decrease endogenous ketone production at levels over 3.5 millimoles. Ketones are not going to instantly melt fat off of your body without any other changes. Ketones will not work if not given in effective dosages and forms. Ketone salts do appear safe to consume at common usage levels. Work is being done currently in cancer, epilepsy, traumatic brain injury, and other neurological conditions. I specifically didn't even mention cancer, but I'll put the citation here for you from Dr. Angela Poff. Ketone supplementation decreases tumor cell viability and prolongs survival of mice with metastatic cancer. Very interesting research going on there. And when you're looking, you need to look at cost per effective dose. And by the end of this video, I hope you understand what the effective amount means. It means it's the actual bioavailable isomer, the R form, versus what's put into a pill with not only the non-effective form, but also at very low amounts. And lastly, and I'll do an entire separate video on this at some point in the future, is we need to understand we need to be a better ketone user, better than necessarily even a ketone maker. We need to increase uptake of ketones in our body, in our brain, in our cells. All of those things matter. And I think that's the most important thing. So lastly, for a full list of studies on exogenous ketones, we're compiling a list of these, and we'll keep up to date. And if you guys have any to submit, please feel free to reach out and put them in the comments, reach out to us. But if you go to www.ketogenic.com/ketones, you will see a full list of not only studies that were mentioned here, but a full list of different applications for exogenous ketones that have been published in the literature. And then if you like lectures like this, I sped through this very fast to save you guys time and energy, but really to give a whole overview. This is a similar type of feel and look, but really, really basic version of what we're doing with our brand new Keto Mastery program. So if you're interested in that, go check out ketogenic.com/mastery. All right, guys, appreciate you guys for tuning in. Love each and every one of you. As always, make positivity louder. I'll talk to you soon.